There is a plant growing in ditches, along stream banks, and in the shallows of every clean river in the temperate world. You have walked past it thousands of times. It contains more vitamin C than oranges, more calcium than milk, more iron than spinach, more vitamin E than lettuce. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention evaluated 47 different foods across 17 distinct nutritional categories. This plant was the only one to score a perfect 100. Not 99, 100. Kale scored 49. Spinach scored 86. Every superfood your grocery store has been aggressively selling you for the last 20 years finished behind a plant that grows wild in the nearest stream. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention published this finding in a peer-reviewed journal in 2014. More than a decade later, most people have never eaten it. In the finest restaurants in the world, it is used as a garnish, a decoration, something placed on the edge of the plate to make the real food look more attractive. It is the most nutrient-dense food on Earth, and it is treated as a prop. Welcome to nature's lost vault. The archive opens in the valley of the Euphrates, roughly 5,000 years ago, where the earliest written records of human civilization were being pressed into clay tablets. We do not know with certainty that watercress was growing along those exact riverbanks. What we do know is that by the time writing was old enough to record what people ate, watercress was already ancient. The Persians were already growing it. The Greeks had already named it. The Romans had already carried it across the known world. Hippocrates, the Greek physician who founded the first hospital in the Western world on the island of Kos around 400 BCE, deliberately built that hospital beside natural flowing springs. He grew watercress in those springs. He used it to treat blood disorders in his patients. The man considered the father of modern Western medicine did not open a hospital next to a watercress spring by coincidence. He went there because the plant was already there, and he already knew exactly what it did. The Romans who came after him understood it the exact same way. They named it Nasturtium officinale. Nasturtium, which translates to twisted nose, is a reference to the sharp, peppery scent that fills your nostrils when you crush the leaves. Officinale means it was officially sanctioned for sale as both food and medicine in regulated markets. It was not just a wild herb for foragers. It was a pharmaceutical-grade food, sold alongside medicines. King Xerxes of Persia, commanding one of the largest armies ever assembled in the ancient world, ordered his soldiers to eat it during their long marches. The Persians did not have modern nutritional science. They had centuries of observation that told them watercress was the difference between an army that arrived healthy and an army that did not. Across the world in what is now Japan, a closely related plant called seri has been cultivated in flowing waterbeds since ancient times. It remains one of the 7 traditional spring herbs eaten on the 7th of January each year as a ritual for ensuring good health through the 12 months ahead. In North America, indigenous communities used watercress as a blood purifier, and to treat kidney disorders, knowledge developed entirely independently of any contact with Persia or Greece. Every civilization that had access to clean, flowing water found this plant. Every single one of them understood what it did, long before any of them could have explained why. Chemistry that explains why was not fully understood until the 21st century. And what researchers found was not subtle. Watercress contains a powerful compound known as PEITC. It is the compound responsible for that sharp, peppery bite when you eat it raw. It is also, according to modern research, one of the most precisely targeted anti-cancer compounds ever identified in a food source. PEITC does something highly specific and measurable. It inhibits the liver enzymes that activate carcinogens, while simultaneously stimulating the exact enzymes that flush those carcinogens out of the body. It does not attack cancer generally. It disrupts the biological process by which carcinogens become capable of damaging your DNA in the first place. In 2007, Professor Ian Rowland and his research team at the University of Ulster designed a clinical trial to measure whether eating watercress daily produced measurable changes in cancer risk markers. They recruited 60 participants, 30 men and 30 women, including 30 smokers. Each participant ate an 85-gram bag of fresh watercress every day for 8 weeks. The results, published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, were significant enough that the study is still cited in oncology research today. Daily watercress consumption measurably reduced DNA damage in blood cells, the primary early indicator of cancer risk, and measurably increased those cells' ability to resist further damage from free radicals. The protective effect was largest in the smokers, the group with the most active carcinogen exposure. A cereal bowl full of leaves, 8 weeks. A measurable reduction in the biological markers that predict cancer. Kale costs the same. Spinach is on every shelf. Neither of them contains PEITC in meaningful quantities. Watercress is the primary dietary source of this compound on Earth. There is no pharmaceutical equivalent available without a prescription, and even the prescription options do not work through the same mechanism. The compound is produced by the plant, activated the second you chew it, and is completely free to anyone standing beside a clean stream with a handful of leaves. Now pay close attention, because the story of how this plant went from the foundation of working-class nutrition to a decorative garnish on a steakhouse plate is one of the most specific and entirely avoidable acts of institutional negligence in the history of modern food. In Victorian England, watercress was not a luxury. It was called the poor man's bread. A halfpenny bought 4 bunches, enough to feed a family. Working-class families across London ate it for breakfast with bread and cheese, the exact same way families today eat processed cereal. It was sold on every street corner by women and children who had walked to the markets before dawn to buy it. Street sellers carried it on trays around their necks, selling it crisp and fresh to office workers, policemen, and cab drivers before the working day began. It was not a health food. It was not a superfood. It was simply food. The cheapest available, eaten by millions of people who had no access to anything more expensive. Without knowing it, they were consuming the most nutrient-dense food on Earth with their breakfast every morning. To supply that demand, a dedicated rail line was built in Hampshire in 1865. Its sole purpose was to carry freshly cut watercress from the chalk spring beds of the countryside directly into London's markets overnight. Steam trains departed in the early morning hours, packed tight with wicker baskets, arriving before dawn. The line ran for nearly a century. It was known as the Watercress Line. At its peak, over 1,000 acres of watercress beds were producing continuously, employing hundreds of workers in harvesting, packing, and transport. Then, in the 1960s, 2 things happened simultaneously. The first was a government report. Dr. Richard Beeching, the accountant hired by British Railways to make the network financially viable, published an analysis in 1963 identifying over 5,000 miles of branch lines for permanent closure. The Watercress line was among them. The report did not mention nutrition once. The line closed in February 1973. When the railway closed, the remote spring-fed beds became economically unviable for the London market. Farmers could not compete with road transport costs. Bed after bed was abandoned. The industry collapsed from over 1,000 acres to fewer than 150. The second was the arrival of imported supermarket salad leaves. Rocket, lamb's lettuce, and dozens of other varieties could now be imported cheaply, after trade restrictions lifted. These leaves did not arrive because they were more nutritious than watercress. They arrived because they were easier to package, slower to spoil, simpler to transport, and looked more visually dramatic on a plastic-wrapped supermarket shelf. The nutritional comparison was never made publicly. No government agency published a side-by-side analysis of what consumers were actually swapping out. The market simply moved. The infrastructure collapsed. And within a single generation, watercress was reclassified in the public imagination from a daily staple to an occasional garnish. The food that Hippocrates grew at his hospital. The food that fed the working class of London for 2 centuries. The food that scored a mathematically perfect 100 when the CDC ran its analysis. Reduced to a limp leaf on the side of the plate at a restaurant that charges $35 for a steak. There is no conspiracy here. No corporation ordered fields burned. No general imposed a death penalty. What happened to watercress is, in some ways, more troubling than those stories. It was forgotten through pure indifference, through the quiet accumulation of logistical spreadsheets, shipping metrics, and economic decisions made by people who never once asked what the nutritional consequences would be. The government report that closed the watercress line did not mention nutrition. The supermarket buyers who chose shelf life over watercress did not care about vitamins. No one was paying attention to what was being lost. The CDC finally paid attention 50 years later. The score was 100. Watercress is not difficult to grow. It is a perennial that returns year after year from its root system in any location with consistently moist soil. You can grow it in a small container, a shallow tray of water, or a damp corner of a garden where other plants struggle. It does not require a chalk spring. It requires only that the water it grows in is clean. It is one of the fastest growing plants that humans can consume, producing harvestable leaves within weeks of planting. It is also one of the few plants on the CDC powerhouse list that is genuinely difficult to overconsume. Its active cancer-fighting compound activates only when the leaves are physically damaged by chewing, crushing, or cutting. The plant produces it specifically as a defense mechanism. When you eat it, that defense mechanism becomes yours. The Persians called it food for soldiers on the march. Hippocrates built his first hospital beside it. Victorian London called it poor man's bread. The CDC called it the most nutrient-dense food on earth. You can buy a small pot of it at most garden centers for less than the cost of a bunch of kale. It will grow back every time you cut it. You will never need to buy it again. It is not a lost food. It is a forgotten one. And the beautiful thing about forgetting is that it can always be undone. If this vault changed how you see the food you walk past every day, do not let this knowledge disappear again. Subscribe to Nature's Lost Vault and hit the notification bell. Every like and every share bypasses the algorithm to preserve what the modern world ignored. The next vault opens soon.